Welcome back, Chemraddies, to your favorite pirate Voxwave station, 665.66 UHM Chemrat Radio. Broadcasting live tonight from the Hangnail on sublevel 77, neutral territory for all you gangers out there. In Hive news, some scum gators are out of control over the last couple of weeks, with reports of some of them having up to 8 legs. Make sure to keep those auto guns, stubbers, and las pistols close at hand just in case your afternoon commute is rudely interrupted and not by the Arbites.
Afternoon delight.
I am your host with the most, Goblin King, and I am joined today by my co-host, Marky.
Yo.
And we are graced with the lovely presence of Beast.
Hello, everyone, guys and gals. How we doing out there tonight?
Out on assignment this week is Kevin. We sent him back into the depths of the Imperial Navy to figure out what type of dresses they wear.
Yeah, he might be coming back without toes next time.
You know,
which is very unfortunate.
I heard them cyber toes, though. They extra clingy.
Worst thing, he might be coming back in a skirt.
That wouldn't be the first time.
All right, guys. So we've gone over our own lore. We've gone over some of our own lore. We've gone over our Hive lore, and we've even talked about what lore is in general. But we kind of gave a flak cannon or shotgun overview of what lore could be when Marky and I sat down to review the notes going into our second creative writing episode, today's episode, creative writing, where to get started. We realized that creative writing is incredibly rich and diverse with hundreds of rules that you can learn and then bend or even break to suit your individual needs. With that in mind, instead of trying to cram it all into one episode, we're going to kind of just look at specific topics within creative writing every couple of episodes, every few episodes, maybe once a month, maybe once every other month. But we definitely would love some feedback or any questions on parts of the topic of creative writing that you feel that we've missed or that we haven't touched quite fast enough yet. One of the really good ways that we just want to bring up right up top to get in touch with us is through our Discord.
The very best way to reach us, because we are all on it at all times of the day.
Yeah, you get some good interactions with us. It's a great place to ask us some direct questions. We do tap our community for all sorts of podcast needs. Before we get into the meat of today's topic, I wanted to go over the difference between storytelling and world building. So in our last creative writing episode, we talked about lore by bringing up a couple of examples of the way that lore is used in video games and the way that lore is used in movies to kind of establish background radiation, background noise, or set dressing, as Tom brought up, for what you're watching. But there really are two major, I guess, paths in my mind anyway, when it comes to creative writing or this type of creative writing. And that's what is storytelling and what is world building. So we're going to split down those two major paths to help explain some of the ways that you can set out when you're attempting to write lore. As we brought up in the last episode, one of the really big differences or one of the really big ways to look at world building is that of Star Wars. You can look at the world building of Star Wars and see a very rich and diverse environment that can be played in versus the story, which is relatively paper thin. Most expanded fictional universes do have a good mix of both of these, both world building and story, and arguably good stories require incredibly good world building, but that doesn't mean that they're the same thing or even meshed. Halo, Star Trek, or Battlestar Galactica are also examples of expanded lore, expanded world building.
So good.
Yeah, you're talking about Battlestar, right?
I love Battlestar.
Yeah.
I love Battlestar so much.
I was thinking more about like Halo, like as you were talking about.
That's good too.
Yeah, like playing the story of Halo makes you want to like kind of deep dive into, hey, what's more to this universe that, you know, I can learn and understand. Probably very, very few things I feel like that towards.
I was just gonna say, I was like, wow, yeah, it sounds like nothing like you do.
This is very true.
Yeah,
most people have that. It's called history.
Yeah. Fuck that.
Halo's got some crazy deep lore. Battlestar's got some crazy deep lore or world building in this case.
Yeah, the whole thing.
One of the ways that a lot of world building is introduced to a lot of stories is with a trick called exposition. Sometimes exposition is woven really well into the movie or the story, and other times it's that boring monologue or that huge text dump that forces you to read before you even start watching a movie. You can smash your readers in the face with exposition like a video game movie might do, but it isn't always what you want to do. And weaving exposition into the narrative can be a lot more rewarding. One of the examples I always look at with this kind of like smashing exposition into your face.
I was going to say, is that kind of like something that's frowned upon almost?
It's not frowned upon, but it's
like an easy way out. Almost.
It's an easy way out.
I was going to say, because I actually really like it when like they monologue in the beginning of a story. Like you mentioned, or I think you were going to mention Resident Evil, right?
Yeah, Resident Evil does it.
And how is it Alice?
Alice, yeah.
Alice kind of like talks about what just happened, what she's going through, and I'm just kind of like, ooh, this is interesting. Maybe Mila Jovovich just has a sexy ass voice that I love to listen to. Maybe that's
please help.
I think it works really well in a couple of different settings. Like Star Wars, the opening crawl is iconic.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Like without the opening crawl, a Star Wars movie is a Star Wars movie.
Far away.
Yeah, I mean, you get Mila Jovovich to read that to me, yeah, all day.
Oh, I wonder.
But there's, I'm sure there's an ASMR for that.
Right.
But in other cases, it's done. It can be done hackily. You know, like you're listening to a lot of audiobook stuff right now.
Yeah.
If an audiobook was like, all right, so now we're going to talk about why plants exist, and then they just gave you a bunch of information on why plants exist because halfway through the story, the plant they're talking about is important. It's a lot less organic of a way than bringing it up in connection to the story.
Right. Okay. I see.
A big trick that a lot of short form storytelling and like a lot of movies use is the cold open. Good modern example of a cold open to a story would be the intro sequence to Army of the Dead. You are dropped immediately into what's happening in Vegas before the wall is erected. You're not given any exposition. You're not given any explanation.
Is that kind of like Zombieland?
It's the movie with you know what Army of the Dead
Batista,
is. Yeah, Dave Batista.
Yeah.
Zombieland is another good example of a cold open.
Because I was going to say
you literally are dropped into his first rule.
Right.
Like he's getting gas and he's talking about cardio. Like right as the story opens.
I got it.
That's a cold open. You're immediately jumping into something and then you're going to go back and learn why this is important later.
Gotcha. Okay.
And that's kind of a more natural way to bring up exposition. That doesn't mean that world building info dumps don't still have a place, though, as you brought up in the beginning of...
For dumb people like me that don't care for, doing the research.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Little monologue in the beginning with the sexy voice. I'm a simple man.
There you go.
And don't shake your head at me, Tom.
They can hear me shaking my head.
That was the sound of Tom shaking his head. Warhammer 40K is a really good example of this. Actually, a lot of game settings are pretty good examples of this. But in the Warhammer 40K world specifically, most of the world building is done in the rule books, the codexes, and the official releases. So you get your background on what's gone on with the universe. You get why the factions interact with each other the way they do. When you're looking at a Space Marine chapter, you're going to get things like battle doctrine. You're going to get an idea of how their gene seed works. All of that is that encyclopedic knowledge. And you play Death Watch, so right. You've got a little bit of that. Like you understand that some of the bolters have special rounds. You understand that the Death Watch pulls from all the different chapters. You understand all of these functional world building rules which make the Death Watch work.
Right. Just speaking generally on them. Yeah. I mean, I think when I first started playing, what pulled me in more to the lore was the fact that I could. And Tom always talks about it, how you can collaboratively create a story with your opponent. And that's where I was like, oh, I can make, because I think when I started, it was more of a hobby. Like I can paint this and this is cool. And I get to roll dice. It's a game. And then as I played more, I was like, oh, as you play games, you're developing stories. And right. As you develop these stories, you're like, oh, I can create background lore.
But you're able to do that because there's a certain amount of world building which explains the basics of what you're doing.
Right, yeah, exactly.
If you were given the blanks and you had to come up with, you were given like a blank character sheet with just some stats on it, and there was no explanation to what a veteran sergeant was, what a sergeant was, what a scout marine was, if none of that information existed and you just had these guys and you had to figure it out, it's a much more difficult model.
Right. They give you a lot of structure to work off of, or you get a lot of structure to work.
And that's the world building side of it. The narrative side of it is what Black Library is doing. The Black Library is using that world building and going in and giving personalized narratives of soldiers that experience that world. And that's what you were getting at is, you get into your first couple of games and like that one unit just never breaks, never dies, never fails morale. And then you come up with, it's Billy. And you got Billy. You got Billy,
you got Deadeye. Those are like two iconic characters that we really talk about a lot. Beast is definitely turning into that.
Oh, yeah.
Beast Knight, Best Knight, he's honestly like, and like knock on wood, he's never failed. It seems like he's always up in your face. He's always throwing a vehicle into something else. It's like
every time.
And Tom's
time.
Yeah, Tom's lore behind it is that he's just a super aggressive knight.
Yep.
It backs the way he plays on the tabletop, which makes it a lot more intimate, I think.
Yeah.
Like it makes it you love.
Well, that's how I base all of my lore. Is I try to base it off of something that the way that I play.
And that's that cooperative storytelling that Warhammer 40K universe and the foundation that we have lets us do. Just like the examples of war movies that we brought up last time, we have an understanding of the world. Just like when you go and watch a war movie, you have the understanding that there was a Pacific and an Atlantic theater of war in World War II, which helps you frame the story that you're going to tell. In 40K, as an example, we know that Abaddon has led 13 Black Crusades and that the last one ended with the fall of Cadia and the expansion of the Cicatrix Maledictum, which has put us into the current state of the game. Our goal with the lore dump episodes that we've already been working on with the podcast is to explore a lot more of this foundational world building for you guys or with you guys. While our overall goal, just with our podcast in general, has always been to get into the meat of the creative writing and creative storytelling and world building process. To speak from a personal perspective, I've always been stronger when it comes to the world building. Establishing rules, encyclopedic information, timelines is where I kind of feel comfortable. Telling a narrative in those worlds I built has always been a little bit more secondary. I have a tendency to rely on those slice of life or short story forms. This the type of stuff that you see more in like the sidebar of a codex. I'm not trying to write a 20 novel epic, but that's just my strengths. My strengths are in writing codexes, campaign style books. There's just a lot of lore. There's a lot of stuff that I pump in that. And you guys saw that with the teaser last time, where I read off a couple of planets or a planet in my world, in my subsector. And there's a lot more behind that.
Yeah, honestly, like when you were talking about that, I was like, wow, you can really get pretty deep in like just the general information on the background that you have on your armies and whatnot.
Oh yeah. You can expand it as much or as little as you want to. You don't have to justify your Radicus Mechanicus existing by building an entire subsector. I did. You don't have to.
Right, but you do it because you enjoy it.
I love it.
Everybody gets their own personal enjoyment out of the things that they do with their army. It's their hobby. It's however you want to enjoy your hobby. If you like 3D printing and you like writing up 30 pages of lore that nobody might ever read, but
oh my God,
Ryan's dying.
Every orifice. I fart coughed. It sucks.
Ryan, this is the worst because that's when your butthole is just like,
oh my God.
I think shit just slipped out of my ass.
It's visited by Grandpa
like,
Nurgle there.
Normally you get a fart, you're like, oh. This one's you're just like, like your butthole loses all control.
Oh my God.
You might need to go do a safety wipe. You never know.
Bleeding. I'm not bleeding. It's not bleeding when it comes from your eyes. What's it called? Crying. I'm crying.
I don't think bleeding is supposed to happen anywhere naturally.
Bleeding just doesn't. You just don't bleed yourself once a month.
No, yeah. There's some things that bleed naturally.
And I even said once a month. I was making a joke about leeches.
Not here,
sorry.
Bloodletting.
Yeah. So to get back on top, now that I've attempted to die on podcast, to get back on topic, or to bring it back into what you were saying, you don't need to do that expansive amount. That's just what I enjoy doing. Conversely, Tom's strengths, or maybe not conversely, in tandem, Tom's strengths are really understanding the existing lore or the existing story structure, whether it's the stuff that he's come up with on his own or if it's an existing property like 40K, and then coming up with that fireside story that really delves deep into character interactions in the environment. I'm going to be the guy that's going to write the bestiary. Tom's going to be the guy that's going to scare the socks off of you with a ghost story inspired by the bestiary. Neither method's correct. And when it comes to cooperative storytelling in your group, as you brought up, merge all this stuff together. Come up with a different way to tell these stories. Come up with your own way. So one of the biggest hurdles that always comes up into this is how the fuck do you actually start, though? Writing is intimidating, even if you've been doing it for years. There's a lot of rules when it comes to writing, and it can often feel incredibly overwhelming trying to just start. Even when using an existing universe like 40K, it can even be intimidating on top of that to keep the history of the universe straight so you don't accidentally retcon, forget, or change some major element in the story that you're trying to tell based on the existing lore. Just like with a kitbash project, though, or sitting down and starting to paint a model, it's intimidating enough that the idea of even putting your pen on the paper can be paralyzing. It's that thing that you do, well, I feel like we all do it with painting. We see somebody's awesome paint job and we're like, well, I'm not even going to start because I can't get that good.
I actually do hear that a lot. And I don't think I've ever felt that way. Every time I see it, I'm like, I want to paint that well. How did he get that? How did he do that effect? How did he do, this style?
Right.
So it's more of like a challenging me. So I'm like, how do I do that?
And that's kind of what you got to do with creative writing. You've got to look at it like any other part of the hobby or any other skill that you're trying to develop, like Mark just brought up, and set aside time to research it and to actually work on it. Because that's what you do. You see an effect that you like, and then you go research it and you try to build it, and then you set time aside to paint like that.
Yeah. Plus, it's always just fulfilling to actually get it done. If you're not doing anything, what is it like? If you can't win if you don't play, or what the fuck is that lotto saying? You can't.
If you ain't first, you last.
Yeah, I guess
Ricky Bobby.
Yeah, that's the one I was.
Shake and bake.
Shake and bake.
Shake and bake.
So even if it's just 30 minutes a day, if you're interested in creative writing, just set down some time to jot a couple of ideas and get them out of your head and get them onto paper. It's a start. It's a little bit of structure. It can help you out. To give you guys an idea, between my own 40K lore projects, research and writing for the podcast, and my own personal science fiction / science fancy world, I probably spend around an hour a day writing during the week. And at times I can go up to 4 to 5 hours on the weekends. I have found, just like painting Warhammer figurines, making it a goal to do a certain amount a day helps. But don't think you have to outright me, or that even approaching that level of writing is the good idea. I've got a little bit of education in this, but it doesn't mean that I have any sort of raw talent, and it doesn't mean that I'm an authority on writing at all.
Yeah, it's just your personal experience, right? Yeah, I take the same...
Just some context.
Yeah, I take the same route or guidance on painting. I try to get at least like 30 minutes of painting done every day as best I can, even if it's like only 10 minutes a day. It's
right.
If the military or life, if military or life teaches you anything, it's 1 foot in front of the other. If you're not, taking that step, you're not moving. So just keep trucking along. And
just like you would do with the painting, I feel like we all probably check out a couple guys, Miniac, Ninjon,
totally,
Squidmar. There's some painters that we all sort of look at. I do the same thing with writing resources. Brandon Sanderson, who's the author of the Stormlight Archive, is one of my favorite authors. He has an entire lecture series on writing fiction. He's got YouTube lectures, YouTube classes, YouTube classes for if you've got a goal of wanting to write a novel over the summer, he'll tell you how to write your first novel.
He gives you like structure.
He gives you some structure. He's got his own rules.
Fortunately, nowadays with the internet, you can learn or pretty much figure out how to do whatever the hell you want.
Yeah, there's a lot of teaching resources out there.
Yeah, for free.
Another guy that I really like is the YouTuber Hello Future Me. He actually goes into breaking down existing properties, things like Avatar: The Last Airbender, Lord of the Rings, a couple others, to explore the writing tropes, styles, and world building that are in there.
That's pretty interesting. Yeah.
And
That's dope.
we'll toss some links down below in the description like we do, so you guys can follow those and check those guys out.
The one thing that gets me about like the individuals that do things like that is sometimes, and this is just me personally, it feels like they can almost ruin it. So like, you know, when you are listening to like a movie review or a game review and they're giving like, oh, this is why this is bad. But when you play it, you're like, man, that was a fun game. What does this guy think about it? You go listen to what the guy thinks, but he's like, well, honestly, the game sucks because, you know, X, Y, Z. Like there was like the graphics weren't there. They're, you know, comparable to like 5 years ago, or just, you know, little things like that almost kind of ruin. Like they give you a different perspective, and because they give you that different perspective, you don't enjoy it as much.
So one of the
that might just be me.
One of the things that I encountered when studying literature at the beginning was that there's two different concepts. There's positive and there's negative language, and depending on how you structure your criticism, you can go down. You know, and we suffer from this as a group of creative people writing a podcast together. When we have our production meetings, this happens. Sometimes we'll bring up something in a very negative light, like it's a negative criticism, and we're not using positive language.
Right.
And I'm not very good at figuring out when to use positive language versus negative language. I know that it exists, so it's something I try to work on. Yeah. But I feel that both Brandon Sanderson and Hello Future Me very much stick with that positive side. They'll, you know, specifically Hello Future Me, I don't know why I keep doing that. Hello Future Me will look at like, he's got, I don't like Avatar: The Last Airbender. It didn't click with me. I think I was too old when I finally watched it. I understand that it's got some good world building in it, and I can look at it from that lens, but I don't enjoy it. Hearing him talk about it, he presents it in a positive enough light that I got more out of going back and watching what he was talking about. You
have a little more respect for it now that you see, like, okay, that is why this, you know, demands the respect that it's due.
Yeah, and one of the things that we talk about a little bit in the science fancy, you know, there's science fiction and then there's science fancy. 40K is a little more science fancy. There's a lot of fancy magic giblets over there, but in the science, in the science fancy world, or the fantasy world, we often talk about the difference between like hard sci-fi and soft sci-fi, hard magic systems and soft magic systems. So these guys, both of these guys actually introduce these concepts as like, you know, for instance, a soft magic system isn't bad if it's used properly, you know, and it's making the decision to use it properly. A soft magic system can work. A soft magic system would be a great example would be Miracle Dice from Sisters of Battle.
I was like, I'm looking at Ryan and he's like soft magic versus hard magic. I'm like, I don't know what either of these things mean.
So chaos magic from Warhammer 40K is a hard magic system.
Gotcha.
For every action that happens that's powered by warp magic, there is a cost, and usually that cost is very high, but it's an understood cost. There's a mathematics, there's a science to that cost. We can say every time a chaos sorcerer in the Warhammer 40K universe casts a lightning bolt,
he loses a hundredth of his soul or some shit. Yeah.
Say somebody grows a tentacle on another planet, something happens, a cultist dies. There is always a trade for the power that's being consumed. Mm-hmm. The power of the Emperor is soft magic. Another really good example of soft magic is Gandalf. Gandalf's power in Lord of the Rings, there is no measure to it. Gandalf can essentially show up and do miracles.
No.
So miracles would be soft magic, as to where the trade-off of
like Saruman or
the Hobbit, the ring, the One Ring.
Oh, okay.
The ring that Bilbo has.
Them all?
Yeah, thank you.
One ring to bind them?
We know that every time you put the ring on, there are consequences to it. And we know that one of the consequences to that is it twists your body and you can eventually end up being a golem.
Right.
You know. Anyway, so that's kind of that introduction.
I see it.
And they bring up those concepts in that way. So it's always kind of a positive. They're not going like, oh, this is dumb because it doesn't follow these rules. They're going, this works because these are the rules that they chose to follow or whatever.
Yeah, I gotcha.
Anyway, we thought a lot about this because this stuff can really just go on and on and on and on. I can tell you how I use socioeconomics to world build in Dungeons and Dragons, or the planets that I put into the Skaldmare worlds, but that doesn't help you start writing. So we kind of tried to boil it down to 5 tips and tricks for you guys to use as you see fit. In my experience, all of these things can help, but not any one of these are rules, and none of them are going to make or break your writing. This is all theory designed to help kickstart the creative process just when it comes to that initial sitting down and starting to write those first couple of pages, those first couple of ideas into it. Nothing is as frustrating as knowing that you've got this idea in your head. You can feel it, you can see it, and you even have a goal of writing it down and sharing it with your friends, or writing it down and sharing it with the podcast so we can read it later. And not actually being able to write it down. That's a very frustrating, it happens with painting. It happens with kitbashing. I got this cool fucking idea and I just can't get my hands to do what I want.
You know what that almost kind of reminds me of? Like, when you have like a really badass dream and you're like, man, that's a cool ass story. That's a cool ass idea.
Want to remember it.
Right. Yeah. So that people have like dream journals and whatnot.
Yeah.
That's something that's always like happened to me, where I have like a badass story and I'm like, man, that was awesome. And then like later in the afternoon, I'm like, man, what did I dream about last night? I remember it was badass, but I don't remember what it was.
So legit tip 6 or tip 0 from Marky. We didn't even put it down, but tip 0 is, journaling is awesome. Dream journaling or idea journaling, always having something you can write with. Nowadays, it's super easy. Most of us have a smartphone. Most of us have access to Google Documents like that. Open it up, write it. So here's our tips. Number 1, names aren't important yet. Number 2, borrow existing structures. Number 3, start off in one place. Number 4, establish the needs versus the desires of your subject. And number 5, when you're stuck, flip it on its head. And that's it. Thanks y'all for listening. We got a Patreon. There's some links down at the bottom. I really hope that explained the entire writing process.
Yeah, good luck.
You guys have anything else? No, we're good. Yeah, we're at it. Should we actually tell them shit now?
I thought we told them plenty.
I mean, we gave them a list, right? We're done. Yeah. So trick 1.
When you're stuck, you're stuck.
So trick 1, names aren't important yet. I'm not going to lie. I struggle with this a lot, and I probably always will. I either come up with an awesome kick-ass name right out the gate, connect it to a bit of lore that I want to tell and move on, or I get stuck on the name for fucking hours. And if you guys don't believe me, you heard it in the Hive episode.
Yeah, that's true.
I was so intent on the name that I got stuck.
I think all of us were. All of us were like, we need to figure out what the fuck you're going to call your gang.
And here's the thing that fucking kills me. I'll get stuck on something for hours and I'll finally come up with something and I'll put it down. And then 3 revisions later, I'm like, this is dumb, and I'll throw it out.
I really like Splatterhawks, though.
I do. Here's my example. It's not Splatterhawks. When I first named the Skaldmare worlds, they were called the Maiden Worlds. And they were the Maiden Worlds for more than a year through several revisions. Until my dumb brain remembered that Maiden Worlds is already the Imperial translation for an Eldari word that refers to Paradise Worlds. Eldari's Paradise Worlds are called Maiden Worlds. These are worlds that Eldari science has made absolutely fucking beautiful and perfect. But this is an illustration. It's pretty common. I got the idea stuck in my head and I got blind to where the inspiration came from and how to work my way out of that problem. Later, when I realized that there was an issue, it was a pain to change it. I didn't want to change it. And I had this disenchanting moment where I had to face the facts that I wasn't being a unique person. But as we mentioned, we were brainstorming off the bat, coming up with a bunch of names, and then all of a sudden it fucking hit me, Splatterhawks, and you guys immediately reacted, which is what I'm trying to do, which is what we're all trying to do in our heads when we're thinking about names and thinking about how to name stuff. And that's a great way to break it, is that brainstorming, bouncing ideas off your friends, trying to come up with a bunch of names. Tom, again, I'm going to bring you up. You're great at coming up with names on the fly.
Thank you. I try.
Big too fast nuts.
But ultimately, when you sit down and you want to write, you're going to go through at least 2 to 3 different drafts, and the name isn't that super important right off the bat. Normally, when I try to break myself of this idea, I write down a word that means what I want, and then I come back to it later when I have more lore down and I'm able to address it, and I want to change and make it set and final. You guys saw that you heard that happen in the Hive episode. We kept brainstorming past it. We came up with a couple of different ideas. We did it in your orc episode too, to an extent, not necessarily with names, but you had a couple of ideas, and then you were like, these are the things I'm going to lay on the table. We're going to move over here.
Yeah, definitely.
We'll come back to this later.
Yeah, I just wanted to, plant the seed.
Yeah.
And then, move on to the next thing, and, maybe in the back of your mind, something will grow.
And that's what this is. I'm using names as an example because it's really easy to get stuck on naming.
Right.
But you can use it in any different way. So to get back to the example I brought up with the Skaldmo worlds, I knew I wanted it to be a play on the concept of the shield maiden from Norse mythology. I came back, I looked at the word maiden worlds, I realized it wouldn't work. So I started dipping into Old Norse languages and just looking up what things meant. And I did that thing where I went like way off into left field. And then I just typed in Shield Maiden in Old Norse. It's literally Skaldmare.
Well, that sounds
and
dope,
it's such a fucking cool name. And it means the same thing. And I'm not even that creative. It's just a name that fits the idea of what I was trying to tell better.
Right.
And it sounds badass.
It definitely does. I like Skaldmare. That sounds fucking sweet.
Lastly, one of the biggest examples that I want to bring up about all of this stuff to you guys is that this is not something unheard of. One of the largest companies that we all deal with in the world, their business name is an accident and a typo. Google is actually a misspelling of Gogol, as in Gogolplex. This is a name that is super important to the company. They misspelled it, and instead of doing anything to fix it, they left it and it's stuck. It's unique and it's awesome. So tossing down a couple of notes or coming up with something crazy and then moving on and seeing what that planted seed grows. That's how you put it, right? Plant that seed, see what grows.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's
Totally
saying. I was just bullshitting.
No, it's a good advice.
So is that really where Google came from? Is it from Googleplex?
Yeah. Oh, Gogol. Yeah, they misspelled Gogol.
It's pronounced Gogol.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Because Googleplex is in a group of universes, right? Or
yeah, I mean, you say it really fast. It's a very large number.
Oh, really? Googleplex is just a large number?
Gogol is a very large number.
Oh, okay.
I'm not math smart enough to explain it.
It used to be like a billion billions.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
I thought it had something to do with like a bunch of universes put together.
I mean, I think maybe Gogolplex does.
Oh, okay. I mean, I could be
maybe a Gogol is billions and billions, and a Gogolplex has to do with like, that sounds familiar. So
yeah, or I'm just bullshitting again.
You're right. You can be an expert in bullshit. It's fine.
I definitely am.
Marky is a bullshit machine.
Bullshit expert.
Can show you how to say that in sign language.
Bullshit.
Yeah, bullshit.
I've seen this.
Machine.
Oh.
You learned something new today.
I did.
You'll forget it tomorrow. It's fine.
I will. That's nothing new.
So trick number 2 is borrowing existing structure. Most creative writing, from novels to screenplays, have a structure of how they're built. These can be outlines, treatments, story templates. They're great skeleton. They are great skeletons. It's a format that you set down on paper and then start filling it out, fleshing it out, and coming up with different ideas. In their simplest forms, these are lists. They can be, remember those thought bubble things that we used to do in school where you'd like, what are they called, mind mapping?
Yeah, it was something like that. I do know what you're talking about.
Yeah, you'd write down like animal and then you'd circle it and then you go 4 arms, rat, and you'd like put all these bubbles around it and you'd connect it with lines. Do you guys remember doing that?
I do remember doing that. Yeah. I don't know if it was like I could have sworn it was more like,
I think it's called,
I don't want to say complex, but like if you're like doing like farm, for example, you would come up with 4 things like hay, pig.
Yeah. It's like
house.
a mind association map.
Right, exactly.
But it's just a structure. It's something that you can put down on paper and you can start fleshing out. These are really important. And this is part of borrowing existing structure. It helps you communicate to yourself the points that you're trying to make when you come back to reread it and actually flesh stuff out. But this is only half of what we're talking about. You can also borrow from existing media. My first Space Marines were modeled and painted off the idea of the Galactic Empire from Star Wars. While it wasn't the most developed concept or lore, it was my starting space. And as I painted these dudes up and I started to make them look more like stormtroopers, I started to get a better, deeper lore, and they eventually changed. They eventually turned into the War Criers, who are not at all like stormtroopers, but that was the process. I started with a concept of the Galactic Navy, the Galactic Empire, right. Stormtroopers, and I moved into something that fit more with the 40K universe.
Yeah, I did. Mine wasn't as creative. Mine was just like, hey, I really like salamanders. I really like dragons. I really like fire. I chose salamanders. And I realized I really like fighting aliens. And then, the Death Watch RPG came out, and I was like, those guys like fighting aliens, and they look cool. It's time to repaint my army.
And what you did was you started working in the lore of Death Watch into your army.
Yep.
Using it exactly the way it's supposed to be done.
Before Death Watch even had a codex, I was repainting all of my salamanders and playing them as like Ultramarines.
There you go, man.
Yeah.
So going off that's a great starting point. Look at existing movies, TV shows, books, games, Fantasy Flight's other game, and take a look at that when it comes to your favorite army, your favorite chapter, or even your favorite xenospecies. You're not looking with this to copy the entire idea. You're just looking to use it as a template moving forward. I did this when building the planets of the Skaldmere worlds. I searched through wikis on how Imperial worlds were defined, and I just read how they were organized. It was a super simple exercise. I picked a world type. I defined the population size. I put where it was in the solar system. I defined what might live there. I also borrow a lot from history and science fiction when I write things up. For example, I love sandworms from Dune. So a lot of times I come up with crazy creatures that are like sandworms from Dune. I also like Egyptian history. So I tend to borrow bits and pieces when I start world building or blocking in a lore concept. But it really works with everything. Really love heist movies? You could base your entire Death Watch kill team on the bank robbers in the movie Heat. These are heavily armored, heavily trained, ready to die if necessary soldiers that are there to secure anything on target. Watch Heat. Look at how they operate. Look at how they talk. Look at how they spend their free time. Use that as a template to build your death watch. Yeah, your Death Watch. I was like your death team.
Guard almost.
Your Death Watch kill team. Change the obvious stuff, obviously. These guys aren't going to be going after money. They're going to be looking for an alien artifact. They're not going to die at the end. But maybe they do die after they've had those 90 successful missions. Maybe they've got to bring up new people. Hey, instead of the cops and the FBI coming after them, maybe it's the Inquisition.
Yeah, I was almost thinking like Star Wars, what is it, the Bad Batch or something like that?
Oh, yeah, the new one?
Yeah. You can make a kill team after them.
Yeah.
There's something similar. You got your heavy weapons guy. You got freaking your veteran sergeant. You have your sniper. It's very similar things you can do. And they even have like the new Orc Commandos coming out.
Oh, hell yeah.
It's very similar or something like that.
Well, then you've got Tom's Byzantine Empire.
Yeah.
Byzantine Knights. House Byzantine. Sorry.
Yeah.
Byzantine House. One day I'll get it right.
House Byzantine. Yeah.
But that's what you did. You had this existing structure. You had these bits of lore, and you combined them in a way that works for what you wanted to tell.
Yeah. Yeah, basically. I mean, I looked at it, was like, I can do this, I think. I had
make it work.
Yeah, like mine was a goal. Like mine was a goal to make this a thing.
Right.
So
almost a challenge.
Yeah,
right?
That's kind of how I viewed it,
But you borrowed from an existing set
structure.
An existing structure.
Yeah.
And that's a great place to start. Authors start there. Stephen King has started there. Anne Rice has started there. People that have written major books have started with this idea of just borrowing an existing structure.
Well, it's just like Shakespeare.
Yeah.
That thing's, or I don't want to say Shakespeare. Romeo and Juliet. It's been used over so many times in movies and stories.
Oh, yeah.
West Side Story is Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah. I even almost tied it into the orc lore, where I was like, oh, it's almost forbidden that you have two war bosses.
Gorkia and Morkia.
Yeah.
They want to rub non-crotches together.
they want to rub squig nubs against each other.
Do you bite your squig at me, sir?
They want to touch each other's non-crotch.
That's actually an interesting topic, because an interesting segue too is the the story, I brought up the heist, and we brought up kind of looking at a death watch, and then we talked a little bit about House Byzantine, but the structure that you borrow from doesn't have to be the story that you're telling. Say you want to tell a story about an inquisitor and about this inquisitor's journey, and you're trying to figure out what to do. Borrow the existing story structure of a classic romance novel, except it's not a love story that you're telling. Just look at the structure of a romance novel. Look at how it builds. Look at how everything happens. But maybe this is the Inquisitor going crazy. Maybe this is the demon inside its head. Maybe this is the demon he's trying to catch or she's trying to catch.
Right.
You can use that other structure to fill in what you want to tell.
Yeah, definitely. And then you just put your own twist on it, make it interesting, put your own little love into it,
Put your own little love into it. And that brings us to tip 3, starting in one place. A lot of weird, funny, crazy, and exciting stuff happens during tabletop playthroughs. Maybe you have that one guardsman that has never lost a leadership test, even when he's out all alone on the middle of the fucking battlefield. Or you manage to take down a knight, Riptide or Tyrannid monster, turn 1 with a unit of basic Tau infantry. Shit happens, man. This is actually how you approached your orc lore. You based it on a battle between your salamanders and your wife's orcs.
Yeah, I definitely like kind of getting on that personal level of, it's probably why I never really created the lore for my armies when I first started out. It was more of like I wanted to play, and as I played, these stories developed, and it just kind of, gets me a little closer, a little more sentimental with the army.
Yeah. And then just imagine, say you're working on your Necrons, right? You're working on your Necron lore, and you're trying to delve into what makes your Necrons. So you bring up, you grab one of the guys that exists. I think it's Trazen the Infinite.
Right, yeah. The guy manspreading.
Yeah, he's the guy that likes to collect stories, right? Or is it the other one?
Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure it's Trazen. I don't know. Is it stories? I thought he just liked collecting
he likes collecting stuff.
Yeah,
but like the whole idea that like maybe he wants to collect the stories of your Necron troop. So he's going in and he's interviewing these individual troopers to get their ideas. He's stealing their memories. He's living a couple of moments in their shoes. Treat it as if you're interviewing your troops. The game's done. You're trying to come up with it. You need something. Interview that frontline guardsman who survived. How did the battle look like from them? How do those normal guys view what it takes to even get to veteran status?
Right. Like even the story that I really like, we haven't really shared too much on it, but Deadeye. Tom and I were actually starting Crusade back when 9th first came out, and we were like, let's try Crusade out. So we started our little 500 point or 50 power level, 25 power level army, whatever it was. And he actually had a Pathfinder squad with the one guy, like I charged up veterans. They like wiped out the entire squad. There was one rail rifle Pathfinder left. He passed morale. He like double moved with the strat. He like peeked around a corner. He one shot like it was like a captain that was due to like Overwatch, greater good, popped that captain with like mortal wounds and then killed him, and then killed another sergeant on top of that right after. It was like the most gnarly thing ever. Tom could probably tell a story a lot better than I could, but it was awesome.
It's been a few now. There's been a few stories out of that one, because there's another game that we played where he did like the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. He's Deadeye, man. He was gnarly.
And these are the notes that like help you figure out how to name that veteran. That veteran has a name, Deadeye.
Yep.
I mean, another example is Billy, man. Kevin uses him as an HQ, right?
Yeah.
How many Billy stories do we have?
We have tons, and it's great. It's always great to give Billy a new story. Give him a new arm, new leg, new cack.
So this is where you can start. This is a place, start with what you know. Start with your army. Start with things that have already happened. Treat it like an interview. Think of again borrowing from existing structure. Look at how soldiers were interviewed during any movie that exists. That kind of one-on-one thing. Fuck, look at The Office, the way they do the testimonials. Have Guardman testimonials. Have fucking Tau Fire Warrior testimonials. Even if you don't end up using this stuff, just start there.
Yeah,
put some stuff
planting
down.
that seed.
Yeah. You can also do this when you're coming up with ways to name your army uniquely. And we've talked about this a lot, especially when it's come to Crusade. In fact, you just brought it up. We're going to do a Crusade, and one of the rules of the Crusade might be no named characters. You don't want Gaz showing up in the Crusade for
of course.
for Backworld Water 2B.
Yeah,
But
you want Commander Nearsight showing up.
yeah,
Good old Nearsight.
you can
putting a
use
face sword in somebody's face.
you can use Gaz's rules.
Reliably unreliable.
There you go.
Bring them closer.
And that's actually what Grit-Tooth One Tuska is. Grit-Tooth One Tuska fields with Gaz's rules, but he's not Gaz.
Oh, okay, that's awesome.
He's Grit-Tooth.
Yeah.
That's why I made him so big. That's why I made all of his weapons.
Okay, I get you.
Trying to get that
That's
thing.
awesome.
So not something else. So tip 4 is establish your needs versus your desires. Either in a story following a narrative, or when it comes to an entire army, or just setting up a nation, an area, campaign. Look at the goals, desires, and wants of the different characters and groups involved. What are their actual needs? Now look at how those might conflict with one another. In the case of a Space Marine chapter, they might have a lot of constraints on their existence based on the goals and tasks that they've been given out by the Imperium, which make it difficult for them to meet their chapter upkeep needs, and they may not even have the luxury of addressing any of their wants. This happens a lot in the lore. A chapter will get beaten down time and time again in official lore to the point where it's very difficult for them to rebuild their numbers. This is that needs versus desire struggle.
That's like Firehawks, Lamenters. There's a bunch of bunch of chapters that
anybody the Minotaurs or Kerkeridons have been sentiment against.
Pretty much.
We don't like that chapter anymore. Send the Minotaurs. But yeah, Gene Seed might run low. They might lose their fortress monastery. They might lose their ship-based fleet status. So many things can happen. Same goes for the Eldari Lorekeeper, who has inserted herself into Hive life to learn more about the Monkai. Her goals might conflict greatly with her needs and everyday survival or existence. She has to hide the fact that she's Eldari. She has to hide her actions. She has to hide the type of food she eats. Her basic needs she has to hide based on the fact that her goal is to chronicle the life of Hive-worlders. This mindset allows you to look at the obstacles that exist in the existing 40K lore and play with how those affect the army or the characters that you're trying to write about.
So like these rules that I've actually noticed this a lot, or well, no, not that, but like the rules of lore, like the existing lore that's already there. I've noticed that a lot of people are actually kind of scared to write their own lore because they're afraid to step on the toes of the actual lore.
So one of the things to do with that, and maybe the unofficial bonus tip, try to stay away from named characters and try to stay away from major named events.
Unless they're your own.
Unless they're your own. You don't want to write something about the Ultramarines happening on an Ultramarine planet, but
you don't want to be like, oh yeah, my war boss was the right-hand man of Gazgul Thraka.
Right.
Or if you're going to write that, you can just say, oh, my war boss is also a pathological liar.
Yeah.
I actually addressed this with talking about, because one of the things that happens a lot, which I find not necessarily annoying, but it always kind of makes my eyebrow raise, is when people come up with their own Space Marine chapters, there's always a tendency to link it back to something that's like Uber. So they're like, oh yeah, my Space Marines have a mixture of space wolves and
try to make it like too edgy. They were there.
Emperor's children, Gene Seed.
They were there when Cadia fell.
Right. They've got this like super crazy thing. There's a way to play with that. The War Criers, there's a rumor that their Gene Seed might have come from the Vaults of Terra and might be from the Luna Wolves. It's not confirmed.
Yeah.
It's a rumor.
Right.
It's some note in some administratum paperwork that's probably bullshit, because the Empire doesn't know how to keep, the Imperium doesn't know how to keep records. And all signs likely point to the fact that the War Criers are just a successor chapter of the White Scars. But there's that little bit of doubt. And that's it. That's the Warhammer 40K. So in that doubt, don't call it out.
Right.
Don't say, help me out here. Not the Ultramarines. Give me something.
Salamanders.
No. I want to make it sound really Ultramarine-y without being the Ultramarines. Ultramarine. Don't name your guys the bestest soldiers and be like, oh yeah, the bestest soldiers are descended directly from Rabut Gilliman's Gene Seed. as a successor chapter to the Ultramarines. You know, come up with your name, even if it is the bestest soldiers. And even if you want to, you know, name them as an Ultramarine successor chapter. But instead of being like they got their gene seed directly from Guilliman, be like, there is a rumor that upon Guilliman's resurrection, he personally oversaw the re-outfitting of the first company of my squad. There's ways to play with it without, you know, directly
hard facts or hard like chronological lore moments. Like
you want to avoid like, oh yeah, Marius Calgar personally led the haberdashers in their second charge against, because Calgar is an ultramarine. He's not going to do that. The haberdasheries, the dabblers, and I think that's a great point. We probably should have brought it up earlier. And I know like people on the Discord have asked, like, how do you approach this? And the answer is I approach it by specifically not writing anything, you know, borrowing here, borrowing there, linking here, linking there.
You make things like kind of loose facts.
Yes.
Don't
loose facts. I'm not hard tying.
Yeah, exactly. No hard ties to anything. Like well, kind of like we did again. I'm gonna nod back to my orc lore. We were saying like, oh yeah, Gaz is, you know, leading a WA that's following, you know, rolling through this system, and he sends a war boss. So he, you know, Gazgul indirectly affected my own personal.
But Gaz didn't show up.
Right, exactly.
Because at the end of the day,
Gaz, I can always say like it kind of you throw that loose fact in there.
And that does happen, especially since you can just buy these named characters. Right. The temptation is there.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of guilty of buying all the named characters for my Death Watch. Like I bought Iron Father Pharaohs from the Iron Hands, and I put him as my Tech Marine.
Like today.
Death Watch. That was the other day. I hit up Eric and I was like, "Hey, you got this guy?" He's like, "Yeah, I do." I was like, "All right, cool. I'll be right there."
OBG, LGS.
Yeah, that's what's up. So OPP.
Yeah. So some of the things that you can play with establishing needs and desires, just to kind of wrap up here and then move before we move on to our last one. I brought up the idea of the Space Marine chapter that's lost their fortress monastery. They're on the run. They're not having the amount of time. I'm sorry, they're not on the run, but they don't have enough time because of the crusading or other emergencies that they're dealing with in the Imperium to recruit or rebuild. It's a great place to set a story. Another great place to start, and it's just right there. It's rip roaring and ready to go. Is an Eldar craft world. The Eldar are slowly dying. They are slowly losing what they need to continue to sustain as a species. That's a great example of needs versus desire. And you can jump right into it. The Eldar desire to return.
The will to live.
Yeah. They desire to continue existing.
They desire to not get their shit pushed in by Slanesh.
Yeah, just try to put your shoes in those characters, feel the flow of that world around you, try to figure out how those angles might help you develop those story bits, help you drive to the next point that you're trying to get to. So our last tip, Marky, if you can read the title of our last tip. I lost it. How did I phrase this? Beautiful.
The title of the last tip is "When You're Stuck, Suck on Its Head." Flip on its head.
Suck on its toes.
Yes. Sorry. I was reading something else.
So this is a direct tip or trick from my educational background from back when I thought I was going to end up being an English teacher.
We've all been there.
Take your story or your concept and completely reverse what it looks like. In practice, you can look at the story or structure of a romance novel. I brought this up already, and replace the ideas of the romantic entanglements with the obsession over a physical object, the obsession with trying to find something, a voice in your head, a demon.
Yeah, I've never done that before.
This is a very, very common writing trick.
Yeah, I've never in my life done that. I tried that. And I've been stuck a few times, but I've never tried like swapping it over.
Just completely like 180 from what you were originally planning.
Yeah, I've never done that.
Well, what you're looking to do is you're looking to like kind of kickstart that process.
I get it. Yeah, I get it. It's interesting.
You never had to get to that point.
No,
I got you.
So if you're writing about Space Marines, it's a perfect fucking example. Change your army to you're writing about Space Marines. You're stuck. You don't know what to do. Change your entire army to orcs, just as a thought experiment, and try writing and see if that solves any of your issues.
Well, I'm sure that's how Diga knobs were invented. Human orcs. I'm sure there's plenty of other examples.
So in my
Grot armies.
Yeah, Grot armies. That's a fucking fantastic example.
Yeah.
You want a Grot army? Well, now it's Grot Guard.
Yeah, exactly.
But Rat Mechanicus. I wanted Skaven in 40K, and I figured out how to flip it on its head. You can also change your main character's sex. In some of my 40K sci-fi writings, I've used this tactic to force myself to think about the narrative differently. Challenge what the story needs by shifting the entire focus to a female character, in my example.
Gorka, War Boss Gorka.
Right. In fact, I got about 10 years ago. Oh, no, not about 10 years ago. About 5 years ago, I started writing again in my own science fiction universe, which I call the Startide Expanse. And I was very stuck with the main character. The main character was very, very boring. And he was very boring for a very specific reason. When I had started writing right out of college and in my early years, a lot of what I was focused on was that Space Marine idea, that male power fantasy idea. And because I had been so focused on making him the coolest cool that could ever cool, with the biggest muscles and the giantest guns and the most survivability.
I had giantest penis. I was like, dang, dude, you really go
giantest peen. But I got to that level that we've all identified with like the Horus Heresy books. Reading about Space Marines is boring as fuck.
Yeah.
And that's where I was. I changed my main character to a female. And based on that, I rewrote. I had to take myself out of this is my male power fantasy. And I had to look at this as a character, as a character with actual needs, actual desires, actual goals, and discover and design what that was about her. Based on that change, not only did my story get better, but my world building exploded. I all of a sudden had a bunch of needs and niches to fill because I was just now back into the creative process.
You know how you flip that on its head?
I turned it back into a male.
No, you give her a penis.
I mean, we're talking far enough.
That's three-dimensional head flipping right there.
We're talking far enough in the future. I'm sure there's a pill for that, but it's
a dream within a dream within a dream.
That's right. Dream, yeah. And you don't have to keep these changes. This can be a thought experiment. It can be something that you run on the side. It can be 10 lines of dialogue. It could be 3 notes. It could be a couple of words. It might be enough to kick you out of that place you're in and just give you a bunch of answers to questions that you don't even know you're talking about. Same thing happens with painting. I mean, I've found the same thing happens with painting. I'm stuck on how to do like a transition or something. Right. And I'm just like, fuck it. I'm going to test paint something completely different.
Yeah, I do that too. Well, I'll get to a point. I've actually just did it right now where I was painting all the, the Beast Snagga boys, and I got about 50% of the way through, and I was like, I'm going to go paint some Deathwatch here for a little bit.
Yeah, you got to flip it and reverse it and just see if it can kick out that creativity, if it can break whatever mental block, whatever mental strain you're in. And sometimes it's just fatigue.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it could be just bouncing between characters too. But just have the open willingness to completely shift the paradigm of what you're working on. And like Tom mentioned, Tom has never even thought to use something like this. And this isn't like a weird thing I do. This is like creative writing 101. They tell you to do this. Like, you're stuck, change. Literally, you're stuck, change your character's sex. It's taught.
Really?
Yeah. Because it forces you to look at a bunch of different things. It forces you to answer a bunch of different questions.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess I kind of did that with War Boss Gorka, right? We came up with Boob Squigs.
Boob Squigs, yeah.
It was just like a, rival.
Filled an entire
laws.
equal. Yeah. I mean, in my particular case, it was exactly why it's taught needed to happen. Right. My world was so grounded in like fucking Space Marine mindset. Really, it wasn't Space Marine mindset, but it was so grounded in that like ultimate male power fantasy mindset that the story wasn't moving. Yeah. I was just making it's that conversation you get into at the bar where you're like, oh yeah, I caught a fish that was 4 inches. Oh yeah, well, I caught a fish that was 5 inches. Oh yeah, well, I caught a fish that was 6 inches. Oh yeah, well, I caught a fish that was 7 inches. Oh yeah, well, I caught a fish that was 8 inches with 2 mouths. Like, that was the path I was on. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't solving the needs of the story. It was literally just, I got a one up. I got a one up. I got a one up. I got a one up.
Yeah.
I got a one up.
How do you deal with that? I mean, I've like listened to a couple books where it's just like, this guy's fighting demons.
Flip it on its
head,
man.
This guy's fighting werewolves. Now he's fighting demons. Now he's fighting angels. Now he's fighting God. Now he's trying to save the universe. It's like, at some point, it's got to.
Well, you got to look at real consequences to what's happening too. You got to look at the power structure. You got to look at, and I'm facing that now, even now that the character is female, because there's a certain amount of power creep that happens over a story. And at a certain point, you have to reset that power creep, but you have to reset it in a way that doesn't look super obvious.
Right.
Like a fucking super obvious example, and I'm sure most people have read the books or seen the movies, is the Hunger Games shit. Mm-hmm. The Hunger Games is literally, it's a ramp up to an extreme level of power from the beginning of the first movie to the end of the first movie, and then a massive de-escalation. And then they're like, okay, well, we have to tell another story. So what we're going to do? Oh, there's another game, and it's slightly crazier, and they're a little better, but they're not really that better because we fucking knocked them back down to the bottom again. And that's a really obvious, like it ratchets, like it goes up, and then there's a fucking cliff, and you nosedive to the bottom of the cliff, and then you got to walk up the cliff again.
Yeah.
But there's different ways to do it. And it's interesting. I'm sure you're facing it in the, I'm going to itch my chin. I'm sure you're facing it in the book that you're listening to right now, because the rogue traders and inquisitors, very, very common. Like, where do you go? You're now hunting demons. Like, what's the next step?
Yeah, honestly, that book I listened to was gnarly. Like, it had some crazy shit. I'm actually listening to Brutal Cunning right now. It's a little rough. The guy, I think I already talked to Tom about this, and I might have mentioned it in one of our later podcast episodes with the guy. I'm not a fan of his orc voice. He sounds like the guy from Small Soldiers. That's like the Hunchback.
Yeah, you did mention it.
And I was just like, I can't. Like, and then like his grots are like they sound like
leprechauns.
Yeah, they sound like little leprechauns.
That's just like, Games Workshop.
I was like, this is rough, man. Like, I'm sorry, I can't listen to this. Like, the main character, he does the main character well. All the other ones just sound like they just
like how Games Workshop makes them sound.
No, they sound worse. They sound worse. If they all sound like the main character, I'd be fine. But they just like, hey, where you going, boss? I'm just like, oh my god, I can't listen to this.
That's it. Yeah.
I can't listen to this. It's hard.
I actually kind of like the Beast Snagga voices that they've done for the stuff where it's a little bit more Australian.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's kind of like
I kind of like.
It's kind of a little bit more like a Crocodile Dundee-ish. I like it better. Than
I like how they kind of did it with the Kill Team stuff, where the commandos that sound. Well, those aren't Beast Snaggas. Those are commandos.
Right, but ever since the Beast Snaggas were released, they've kind of gone with that like Australian hard ass rather than, Manchester gutter punk.
Yeah,
it's a little bit of a shift. I like it. I've liked it so far.
I think it's rough. I like the rough kind of sounding. What do you say? Like, I guess speech.
Yeah, guttural.
Yeah,
guttural speech. It's more guttural. It's less dumb Cockney, and it's more guttural. I like it. I think they're going in a good direction.
Yeah.
So those are our 5 tips and our 1 freebie. One of the things that we endeavor to do as the podcast, though, is to be very involved with our community. Interested in being involved in the writing process of the podcast, you can join us on Patreon to access polls, chat with us, and see a couple of other perks. For instance, we turn to our community and ask questions when we get into some of this creative writing stuff. So I'm going to jump right in here. You want to read the questions, Mark? And
yeah, sure. I don't mind.
Go around and answer them.
I learned to read really good.
I'll learn. Hooked on Phonics worked for Mark.
I was too poor for that. I was too poor for Hooked on Phonics. All right. So our first question is actually from Ickbard himself, the Ick man, the Ickmeister,
the Icky
brother Ickbardius,
the sticky icky.
Yeah, the stickiest of the icky. Oh, sticky icky. How much belief can you suspend for your narrative purposes, and how often? People tend to root for the guard and overcome the odds almost every time. But the second we slap some power armor into the mix, it's just another Matt Ward-esque story.
So I think it depends on what you're trying to go for. In general, heroes should always stay and always feel a little heroic. I think that everything, though, needs to be grounded in kind of a specific power scale or hierarchy. A guardsman in a flak jacket is probably on the lowest end, but 5 to 10 guardsmen should probably be able to take out a standard Space Marine. And probably 2 Space Marines should be able to take down a Primaris Marine, and 10 Primaris should probably be able to give a Primarch the run for his money. I think what you're kind of driving at, though, is that equipment and tactics are kind of the great equalizer of the 40K universe. For instance, always remember a guardsman can actually wear power armor, Or a guardsman can sneak up behind a Marine and slap a melta bomb to his power pack or the back of his head. There's always ways to write lore that work within the established power hierarchy where the rules might be bent but not broken by the people in the story. A handful of soldiers, for instance, use sticky bombs to blow the treads off of an armored convoy, and we all believed that, or at least followed that, in Saving Private Ryan. So a handful of guardsmen doing the same to a unit of Marines isn't that big of a stretch, depending on how you write it. I personally don't like flawless and invulnerable characters. And I don't think that's how a Space Marine and Primaris really were designed to be used. They've got a lot of advantages, but they're also incredibly flawed. And I think that you can point out those flaws and really kind of steer into the fact that they're walking monsters. They're also not invulnerable. Plenty of things in the lore shred power armor, including standard Eldar troop weapons, Tyranid scything claws, plasma weapons.
Yeah, they say, I mean, like Gene-Stealing claws, slice through power armor like butter. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, as far as suspension of disbelief or suspension of belief, is it disbelief?
Suspension of disbelief.
Yeah, I mean, when you're writing a story, I feel like when you have that, that feeling of almost impending doom, or that feeling of like anything can happen, it makes it for a more interesting story. So
it's much more interesting story.
Yeah, so the more vulnerable you make your people, like if you have vulnerable, like Lamenters, for example, everybody loves Lamenters because they're the ones who have bad luck, and they're always like on their back foot, they're always in trouble, they're always and everybody loves them for it because it's like, fuck man, like it makes an interesting story. But nobody cares about Ultramarines because they're the overpowered vanilla, like always win.
Well, and they're the poster boys, and because they're the poster boys for the company,
they get
there's going to be a lot of love for them,
right? So it makes for an interesting story. I am all for like very far-fetched suspension of disbelief, right?
It's what we were just talking about too. The Matt Ward-esque era for lore, especially narratives, was always that one-upsmanship. Yeah. Every Ultramarine had to be better than the last one.
Right.
I don't know. My favorite thing to do in any type of story case is when you have that one character, and it's just to avoid the tropes. Like oh, there's that hero character, and man, against all odds, he's gonna succeed.
Right.
My favorite is like against all odds, he does fail. And he's dead now. I love that.
Well, it's almost like Billy, right? Because, Billy, Billy's not winning every war he's been to. He lost his legs, he lost his arm, he lost his eye. And it's like, because Billy is human, because he can lose those things, it makes him
flawed
more
and rebuilt.
He's more interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's just like I've talked about that story of like the knights, and what happens when they go back home, and it's
there's more of on an emotional level.
Yeah, like they go back home and it's like, oh, and everything's dead, and it's just like, and there's no going back, you're just fucked.
The flaws and personal hardships really sell a story. I don't know if you've seen the movie, but there's a movie called Feast. It's a horror movie, and every time they introduce a character, they tell you like their position in the story. So there's this scene that this dude dives through the bar window with a shotgun, and then like hits dives through the bar window breaks obviously, and then there's one of those like sticks holding like a fucking flap inside, and he kicks it out of the way, and the flap falls, and he locks the bar door, and then he leans back up against it, and it fucking freeze frames, and it goes, name, and it gives his name, and it's like position, hero, probably the only guy that will survive till the end of the film. And literally as soon as the freeze frame ungoes, the fucking wood shutter that he just slammed closed and locked explodes, and this monster comes in and bites his fucking head off.
Oh shit.
He's just instantly dead. So the movie leads you to believe that this is the hero of the entire story, and then literally fucking kills him. Yeah. And that's interesting. It's an interesting way. That's a good cold open.
Yeah.
So
you want to read? I'll read the next one. So God Warrior.
I was gonna say I don't mind reading them.
Oh yeah,
you got a little bit of more input than I do.
You read. I'll read them.
Unless I'm doing a bad job.
Marky don't know how to read good.
This from God Warrior, the other homie. How big and bad can the boss of the wall be?
So orcs technically don't really ever stop getting bigger and meaner. On the tabletop, we have the biggest boss rule, Lore-wise, however, in 544.m32, there was an orc called the Beast, who united the largest Waaagh that was seen to date. This orc was even larger than the orc Horus defeated during the Olinar Crusade, which is how Horus was named War Master. The Beast aimed to overthrow the entirety of the Imperium and rule the entire galaxy, and was only barely stopped at a great cost and devastation to the Astartes? I always say it wrong. Astartes, not Astrades, Astartes. The Administratum eventually concluded that the Beast was not a single war boss, but a collection of 6 prime orcs, each who controlled their own Waaaghs that rivaled the size of a Space Marine Legion of the Heresy era.
That is gnarly.
However, there was a leader known as the Beast of Beasts, who stood over 10 meters tall, roughly 32 feet, and was encased in his own custom power armor. He was so massive, when the Astartes encountered him, they thought he was a massive effigy to the orcs until he actually moved. In fact, Vulcan died, in air quotes, attempting to kill the Beast. We'll cover this more when we get to the War of the Beast, but there's a little insight into orc history.
Gnarly, as always.
Not only that, but the Beast of Beasts spoke perfect High Gothic.
Really? I think I remember hearing about that.
He scared the shit out of the Imperium. They were like, oh, fuck, we're screwed.
Oh, shit.
Vulcan died.
Yeah.
Killing him. Vulcan died trying to kill him.
Yeah.
Somebody else actually killed him.
Yeah, didn't he like throw Vulcan into the sun?
He threw Vulcan into
Really?
Yeah, he like threw him into space. Like,
threw Vulcan into an orc power reactor, and Vulcan sacrificed himself to fuse with the power of like Waaagh energy to strike a killing blow against the Beast of Beasts, and it didn't actually kill him.
Damn, dude.
And like the blast like shot Vulcan into space.
Yeah.
Like they had to like find him like as he was like orbiting the planet. Like
it's insane, man.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, like, so the question, no, there is no limit.
They just get bigger.
They just keep going.
Yeah, it's 40K. It's hard to get big.
Yeah, right. Shit does
everything fucking kills you.
That's a very good point.
When your entire culture is essentially built around the idea of becoming the biggest and then beating the fuck out of the last biggest so you can become the new biggest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gauze is probably the biggest currently.
Well, yeah, like, you know how people die all the time from, like, slipping? Like, they slipped and, like, broke their neck? Like,
Oh, I
40K is, like, times 10.
I thought
like, people die, like shitting. Like...
he was like...
Took a fat shit today.
Yeah, like, I'm dead now. Yeah, like it's hard for an orc to get that big.
Tom was all... people die from slipping. I'm like, that's a really weird name for a grot assassin.
Yeah, right. Hey, man, he catches you slipping.
He does.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
That's slipping.
His poison dagger is called banana peel. Nobody understands where the joke originated, but goddamn if he's gonna let it rest.
He's got that yellow power stabber. He calls it banana.
Doesn't even know what a fucking banana is.
Yep. All right, so our next question is actually from the homie Bearmex. He says,
the disrespect of this motherfucker.
Nah. Bearmex knows what's up, dude.
He joined your tribe, not mine.
That's right.
Oh, okay.
Because he's the homie. All right. So Bearmex is saying, so I'm planning to start my lore after the fall of Cadia. Do you guys know of any lore or trivia that involves Death Guard, Sisters, or Orcs? I want to link my armies together. Could you also quickly spitfire some ideas on how to get started? So that's actually a really good...
you guys want me to drop the lore bits and then you guys can spitball some ideas?
Well, I was actually just going to input right now that I'm actually tying all of my armies together. My salamanders, my orcs, my Death Watch, my Genestealer cult. I don't know if you guys have seen, but like my Genestealer cult are, they're kind of intermixed with alien. And if you've looked closely at my Death Watch, I have alien eggs
on the bottom
on my bases. Yep. So they're kind of tied into one another. And I do have that's on a later Loris, what do you call it? A Loris Obscurus episode?
No, Loris Obscurus is the horror ones. Lore stories.
Lore stories episode that we will get into. But yeah, go ahead and say what you're gonna say, right?
So the fall of Cadia happens in 999.m41. For your Death Guard interaction, Typhus was especially active during the 13th Black Crusade, with his plague ships slipping past blockades and the Imperium Navy nets to spread infections in the Cadian and Agrippin sectors, as well as those of the Bellis Corona sector. This later became part of the Plague of Unbelief, which we talked about. That's the one that makes them zombies.
Zombies.
No world was hit harder than the hive world of Subiaco Diablo, which Typhus
I
returned
say it like this.
to.
I say, Subiaco Diablo.
I like it. Which Typhus later returned to and secured as his own plague-ridden stronghold by the end of the 13th Black Crusade. Also, the orcs rampaged across a number of worlds in the Sicarius sector, notably Leth II and Mardax Prime, taking advantage of the opportunity provided by Abaddon's invasion to launch new attacks against the distracted Imperial targets. Mardax Prime could not be allowed to fall into the Greenskins' hands, for it was a Forge world, and its loss would damage the Imperium's war effort against Abaddon. 15 Imperial Guard army groups and 5 legions of cybernetic Mechanicus Scutari troops continued to hold Mardax Prime, but it wasn't enough. The Segmentum Obscurus High Command drew up plans to send a further 35 to 40 regiments of Imperial Guard to the world, drawn from the regional reserves to help bolster Mordax Prime defense. Yet the orcs had set their sights upon capturing and naming it Mordaka Prime.
Yes, I love it.
I don't really know enough about the Sisters of Battle outside of the Age of Ecclesiarchy, though. Sorry, most of my Sisters of Battle knowledge is M35-ish.
Yeah, I unfortunately am not a big Sisters fan, so I don't read up on them too much.
But I would tell you, or I would advise you, I would spitball for you that if 35 to 40 regiments of the Imperial Guard and a bunch of Scutari were being
some
sent
Sisters were there too.
to Mordax Prime, there are probably Sisters there too.
Yeah, but they're more of like, what do you call it? Demon, almost like Grey Knights. They're more of like a demon or...
Kind of.
Right?
They're the militant, they're the chapter militant. They're the religious military. So,
right. So, I mean, they ultimately don't care if there's some orcs around, but hey, they'll care if there's some chaos cultists around, right?
Yep.
Burn the
and
heretic.
Yeah, that definitely the Sisters were probably involved with putting down the Plague of Unbelief or fighting against the Plague of Unbelief.
Yeah, I wouldn't put it past them to, burn that plague out, right?
The post fall of Cadia is probably a pretty good time to plug. We actually, as we had mentioned before, Gilliman's not sure whether or not it's M42 or M43 right now. So if you're playing after the fall of Cadia, you're playing in a rich environment. You really are.
Very, very loosey-goosey.
Good place to start, man.
Yeah.
Any Spitfire ideas on how to get started with his lore other than...
Said Death Guard, Sisters, and who?
Orcs.
Yeah.
Death Guard, Sisters, and Orcs.
Yeah. I mean, I would think Orcs, you can honestly throw that anywhere, even up against Death Guard. And Sisters, you can... almost have like a little trifecta of Sisters were sent to go fight Death Guard, and
Death Guard are hitting really
Death Guard
hard.
were already fighting orcs.
Well, Death Guard are hitting really hard on the eastern fringes.
Yeah, right now. That's true. There's a bunch of Indominus stuff as well.
They're hitting the eastern fringes of the galaxy hard. They're the ones that are fighting Tau right now.
Death Guard?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That sucks for them.
And don't really think of it like I've introduced lore and Tom's introduced lore, and Marky has now introduced lore that all kind of takes place before the fall of Cadia. But a lot of that's because we all started. I remember playing games to decide whether or not Cadia fell. I have the Eye of Terror Codex, which is the book of the 13th Black Crusade. I very distinctly remember playing these missions and like, what, 6th? The 5th or 6th?
Yeah.
So we've got like pre-fall of Cadia play knowledge, and that's probably why we set our stuff in that hazy the before times.
Right.
But don't feel that you got to start there.
No.
100%. My fucking Tau armies lore just starts in the 4th expansion, which is now.
Mine started in the 3rd.
Yeah.
Usually,
which the 4th expansion is 100% post-fall Acadia.
I was going to say, usually in Codex...
yes.
Yeah.
5th and 6th. 5th was lost. 6th is one that's fighting Death Guard.
4th was lost.
No, 5th was lost. 6th is what's fighting Death Guard.
Okay, so my Tau lore is 5th sphere of expansion.
Yeah. See, mine's 3rd. Mine was pretty much right when they started, right when Farsight left.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I was going to say, usually in codexes, I don't know if it goes for everybody, just maybe just my own. But if you look, they actually have like a little galaxy map on each different.
That's what we found a lot for campaign stuff.
Right, and if you kind of like look at that, and you can almost overlap it and see where where the Death Guard are, where the Sisters are, where orcs are everywhere, so it's pretty easy to tie them in. They're pretty much all over the fucking galaxy.
The sisters are going to pretty much go where they're sent,
right?
Or where their order deals with.
Yeah, so if you can find somewhere where the sisters and Death Guard intersect, then you can honestly just throw orcs in the mix.
Sisters are going to fight the Death Guard.
Easily enough. Yeah, and then you can just throw orcs.
Yeah, sisters fight Death Guard fight orcs.
Yep. Shit, I'm sure the sisters fight orcs.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're all about the fight.
No, but I'm saying like in the order. Like if he's talking about connecting them, that would be a good way. Is in the Death Guard are chasing orcs, or orcs are chasing Death Guard, and then the sisters are chasing Death Guard.
So
in fact, Grit-Tooth One Tuska's old banner was a sister of battle. He killed a sister of battle and liked her armor so much that he put her entire body on his war banner.
Oh yes.
I'll share more about that later. That's not his current body. If you guys have seen his current model, he has a Triceratops skull, and that's because Grit-Tooth One Tuska's head's been cut off a couple times and moved to different bodies. We'll get there later.
Yeah, my orc, what's his name? Shithead One Footer.
Shithead One Footer.
He died like right away.
Like right away.
All right, and this is the last question. We have another one from Ickbard saying, with the perspective of many of the stories in 40K being written in a tradition of wives' tales?
Wives' tales, yeah. Old wives' tales.
Old wives' tales. And legends full of regalia, such as the jokes you made about Riptides versus Imperial Knights.
Yep.
We made a joke about Riptides versus Imperial Knights?
Yeah. I was talking about Damocles.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Being used as an excuse for soft retcons of details and motivations throughout various stories in the Black Library. How could you use this concept to alter lore to your advantage without it coming off as hack writing? An example I can think of in this premise would be the musical Twisted, which gave various Disney villains a new perspective as anti-heroes and filling in the missing details to make a new and compelling story.
Mark had brought this up earlier. I don't think I ever really want to alter the existing lore itself. Shifting perspectives on how a character is seen, I get. An example of this that I can think of that exists in the actual lore is the Tau and the Imperium. They're really, really good at using their propaganda machines to make themselves look real good and the people that they just lost against look real bad. I always get a little wary when it comes to outright changing any of the named GW characters. That we literally talked about this a couple minutes ago.
Yeah.
I can find arguments for why people might think that they have to, but for me, it's just avoid at all costs.
Yeah, I try to avoid it as well.
To get to your example of the musical Twisted, I think some of that's actually built into the expanded lore itself. We're going to talk about Grandfather Nurgle real quick. Is my favorite example for this. Peasants are serfs. No, Grandfather Nurgle.
Oh, you're talking
so there's Nurgle, the Chaos God, and then there's Grandfather Nurgle, the Chaos God. They're the same thing.
Right.
So peasants or serfs might actually pray to Grandfather Nurgle to deliver them or their children from sickness or pain because they realize that he's the master of sickness and death, even though the Imperial Creed tells them that he's a villain. You know, there's a lot of examples of how to shift that perspective.
Put a spin on it.
Yeah, put a spin on it. And those people aren't chaos cultists. They're reaching out to the thing that's answering.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess a good rule of thumb or a good guideline would probably just be to avoid characters like that altogether. It would make, unless you're actively trying to do something like that. I mean, honestly, it's your hobby, do what you want. If you want to make your Morty Morty did nothing wrong. He was just trying to please his father and he never got the approval and, that this is why he is the way he is. If that's what you want to write about Morty, write that about Morty. But
man, did you just describe Magnus? Feels like you just described Magnus.
No, Morty went through the same thing. Didn't he?
I know.
Yeah, he was.
They all did. That's why they were all mad. They were all mad because Daddy didn't love them enough, except Horace, who was mad that Daddy loved him too much.
Yeah, well, you win some, you lose some.
And then Lehman Russ was like, "Fuck you, Dad. I don't even like your dumb empire. I'm gonna go be Space Wolves.
Space Wolves.
Furries out." So one of the ways to kind of address the earlier concept that you brought up, one of those ways to sort of alter or shift lore to my advantage would be the way that I wrote Tau lore, my Tau lore. So in the 5th expansion, a bunch of shenanigans happened and a bunch of shit got lost.
Start tide nexus failure.
Yep. So the way that
Well, technically, it wasn't a failure; it was a success.
Yep. So the way that I dealt with that, because I've never liked the fact that Tau are stuck into their little tiny empire and the little tiny portion of the galaxy. So I went with a lot of existing Tau lore and just recombined it to my advantage. If you're familiar at all, to get back to our tips, borrow something that exists. I looked at the way that Alter Carbon ran its story. So the story of Alter Carbon is essentially these engramic devices get installed in a new clone body.
Stacks.
Yep. Your stack gets moved into a new clone when you want to move. And this helps you extend life.
Little solid state hard drive that everybody gets.
Just shove it in the back of your neck.
Yeah. You just put it right in your spine.
And like legitimately, that's a pure type. What do they call them? Pure type engrams?
Yeah, pure type engram neuro chip.
Yeah.
Oh,
this is a thing that exists. The Tau, if the Tau have one, the Tau have the ability to make hundreds of thousands. There's no reason that the Tau only have one. There's only one in lore because there's only been need for one to make your army and one to tell a story.
There wasn't. No, they had a bunch.
They do have, but no, with the eight, they kind of hint at there being more.
No, they did. Pure type engram neurochips were put into a bunch of them, and then a bunch of generals, and then they Onvad decided that, you know, because they couldn't fight psychers because they didn't have the information in the neurochips, so they just like froze. So he said, okay, fine, whatever, remove them, lobotomize these people, you know, get them out of the way. And Farsight was like, whoa, that's my buddy. Yeah. You know, like, because one of his friends had that. And so that's when Farsight kidnapped him and took him away.
Right, but more what I was getting at was that Pure Tide is a person, and they made a copy of Pure Tide.
Oh yeah, no, but they did it to Oblatai.
Yeah, but there's no reason that they also wouldn't do it to Frank.
Yeah, no,
the technology
they can
exists.
They could do it to anybody. That's the thing. Like,
they just saw a weakness in it and were like, yeah, let's not.
Well, the reason they did it for Pure Tide was because they were trying to capture his brilliance, because he was like the ultimate commander.
They basically wanted to like skip officer training school.
Just and they were like, here's this thing. He knows how to win every battle. Yeah. Well, he doesn't. You know, but he did, but he doesn't. So they copied
that propaganda
his
machine
and then inputted it into other generals. Oblatai is just a copy of himself. It's literally his neural net downloaded.
Yeah.
You know, and
he's like an AI.
He's an AI now. Yeah, exactly. You know, he's imprinted with his memories and then he's now an AI. And they could do that to anybody.
Yeah. So I just ran with that idea. There's enough suggestion and lore that they can do it to anybody. There's enough instances of it already happening that I was like, okay, so you want to make an interstellar fleet and your people don't live longer than 80 years and you don't have faster than light technology. Let's just go with those assumptions. So my Tau, basically, they made a bunch of copies of all these warriors. They put them into a bunch of stacks. They put those stacks on ice, and then they grew a bunch of clones, or slow grew a bunch of clones in generation ships. Then they sent these generation ships out. And if you've ever seen the movie Pandemonium, the same setup for that movie. Pandorum, thank you. Every 8 years, a new crew wakes up and cycles in. That's the whole background to my Tau and how they exist. And that's why they're in the Gothic sector.
That's why you have only crisis suits.
And that's why I've got a lot of crisis suits. And that's why I've got warriors. But even if you kill all my warriors, they're just going to be rehabbed into a different body.
Right.
And there's
Takashi's.
And there's a lot of really disturbing, gross stuff I did with that story. I worked a lot of weird horror stuff into my Tau. So I'm not going to share more of my lore. But that's a way to look at, until we get to a Loris Obscurus episode. But that's a way to look at exactly what you're talking about. I took the existing lore and I made assumptions based on it to make it work faster. And like, even in bringing up the example, Tom was able to bring up a bunch of stuff in Tau lore that 100% support what I did. It's just Games Workshop hasn't done it, essentially.
I guess I don't understand the question.
So how can you take various parts of the stories that exist in the world building and in the block library and use them to alter the lore to fit your advantage, to fit your army? So say you wanted
super easy.
Yeah, say you wanted your Tyranids to be.
Well, no. I mean, that's exactly what I'm doing with my knights.
Yeah,
it's exactly what I'm doing with them.
You're twisting
but he's saying like how is the best way to finesse it without seeming like a hack? Like you just fucking what's the word? Arbitrarily just start changing things.
Well, I mean, when you think about where they're going, right? So the whole plan for the knights is to return home, and they return home to
right. But you have no named characters. So, like, let's say you had like the green, what is it, the Green Knight in your party, and he was like Robin Hood or something. You were rewriting him as Robin Hood. How could you pull that off in a finesse?
That is a fucking brilliant Disney character I had not thought about yet.
Yeah, you're goddamn right. I just came out of the top of my head.
That's a new one. I was like, I haven't made a Robin Hood Knight yet.
The Green Warden? Is that what it is?
Yeah, the Green Warden, yeah.
The Green Knight is just an old English tale, essentially.
Yeah, but there's a warden, like the Green Warden that sits like at a tomb.
Yeah, he's a tower. Like he defends like a tower.
Yeah.
But what, have him then be something else?
Exactly. Well, that just like I was saying, like you would make that Green Warden like into Robin Hood, and he joined your crusade. Now he's renamed. How do you write that in? Like, how do you finesse that in there? I don't think there is an easy way to do it. It's just a matter of
there is. I mean,
I was like, I think that would be totally.
So the Green Warden is a role. It's not a person. Nobody knows. Maybe nobody knows that, but at a certain point, another Green Warden is going to take over. And in fact, in the original Green Knight story, that's what happens. When you defeat the Green Knight or when you challenge the Green Knight, you can take the Green Knight's place in the tomb that he guards in England or whatever.
Well, there you go. You got
that is not that story at all.
No?
No.
The different Green Knight.
You have to kill him, don't you?
Yeah, you have to kill him. But he doesn't die. That's the whole point.
He doesn't die. The Green Knight is essentially a phoenix. Like, if you want to actually equate it to something in 40K, it's a Phoenix Knight. You kill the Green Knight, congratulations, he now takes your body. But you could twist it.
Yeah.
You could tweak it where the Knight version of it is that Knight's watch has ended, and he's going to, at night, they're going to switch Knights. Yeah. No one's going to know.
I don't know. I think there's definitely easy ways to do it. Like, I mean, I don't know about like really popular named characters, like, obviously like Robert Gilliam and shit like that. But like, I think for the majority of it, it would be pretty doable.
You can always finesse it some way in there.
Yeah,
and nobody's going to be like, doable. "Oh, that's fucking preposterous. Why would you change that about?"
Yeah, and you would still meet someone like that because, guys, it's 40K. There are those people out there.
Yeah.
Me, for example, I'm one of those guys.
It's the scene where
like I lose my shit every time I see Shadow Sun painted in Farsight armor.
Oh yeah,
like Shadow Sun painted in red armor. I'm like, that's not that. You can't. That doesn't work. Like,
but what if I call her Kitty Waifu?
It goes against everything.
Yeah, I'm like, that's just not how that works.
What if they're on a red planet and they're painting themselves to camouflage?
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
Why does it not matter? It's just red planet.
Doesn't matter. She doesn't need to paint her suit because it has a freaking reactive camouflage.
What if you just like the model and you wanted to be in a different army and it's a different character?
Yeah, exactly. Then that's what I'm saying. Like,
you're fucking wrong.
I'm a stickler like that. Like,
then you convert it. That's what you do. You make it look different.
Not everybody has the stealth armor, so maybe she wants to be uniform with their entire army that's red.
I now very distinctly have in my head, by the way, this scene of Reboot getting into an elevator with a bunch of like traitor Marines and like just like the Captain America scene.
I was gonna say in the elevator,
and like they all look at him. They all look at him, and he just like leans forward and he goes, "I am Alfarius," and they all go, "Oh, okay, yeah," and they all just nod.
He just walks out.
It's a Hail Hydra scene. He's just like, "I am Alfarius." Nobody attacks him, and he's like, "Whew, got away with it, boys. That could have ended badly for me."
That's pretty awesome. That's pretty awesome.
So I think to get to that last little bit, that hack writing bit, one of the things that I try to remember is that the largest and most successful fan fiction enterprise in the world is the Black Library. I mean, it's fanfic, guys. It really is. It's fanfic of the 40K universe.
What I would say on how not to be a hack is don't do what Mark was just doing. Where Mark was like,
try to explain it away.
Well, Mark was like, well, maybe she wants to wear, maybe it's because she wants to wear red to match everybody else.
Okay.
Like that to me is hack writing. Okay. You know what I mean? Because like, I know we're just joking around.
Yeah, no.
But like that to me, I'm like, that's just being a hack. That's lazy. Like,
right.
she's. I just wanted her to have a different color. So you know, she wants to have. We're fighting on a red planet. It's camouflage, and it's like
it's not finesse. You're coming up with excuses.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, that's hack writing.
I see.
But if you were to legitimately be like, Well, you know, she's after Unva's death, she was touched by the fact that Farsight's returned so many times, you know, so she actually decided to wear red
as a nod.
Yeah, like something along. Like I'd be like, you know what? Okay, all right.
Or fuck that.
I was thinking
fuck that,
as like a make fun of it.
Even something like that too. I'd be like, I can get behind that.
A specialized Farsight Pathfinder team is sent on a long expedition and specifically steals an engrammatic chip of Shadow Sun, takes it back to the Enclave, and then the Enclave fucking tweaks her and reinstalls her.
That is
dope.
So they can use her to fight against her.
That was that's awesome.
Yeah. Not hack.
Yeah.
Like so that's
awesome.
That's where I think we're looking at, boys. That's what I think is the best example to
boys.
Is that one. You telling me, well, no, she just has red planet.
Yeah, red planet, red camouflage.
Okay, hacky.
Right.
That thing that you just came up with, Ryan, brilliant.
Yeah.
Like,
I agree.
Because for me, I'm like, ooh, that's a good idea. I'm like, shit, I could do that.
Yeah, I agree.
And I did like 4 of our tips. I was like, borrow something existent, mission impossible.
Just don't write like
it's
me.
not actually Shadow Sun. It just looks like her.
It just looks like Shadow
Sun. Like
it's a copy. You're using Shadow Sun to fight Shadow Sun.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
that's fucking dope.
That is a pretty bad.
Maybe I should get that model. To make her with the helmet, not her actual head. You know.
So you can't see her. They're like, what the fuck is that?
It's actually an AI. Like what?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fucking. There's not even meat in there.
Yeah. It's just like Oblatai.
Yep.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Right? I agree.
That will wrap it up for creative writing getting started. We hope that we gave you some tips that will help you put a couple ideas on paper, some inspiration to help you start writing that project that you want to look at. As we continue doing our lore story series, we're obviously going to continue talking about our own lore, but we are also going to start sharing some listener lore. So if you guys have some stories, go ahead and shoot them to us. Get in contact with us through Discord, email us, find us somehow.
Yeah.
Discord's probably the best.
It is always the best. I say it every episode. It's always the best way to get a hold of us.
But you can email us at underthehiveofmadness@gmail.com or gymdarkgaming@gmail.com. We also have a pretty good roadmap when it comes down to the different goals and the different pieces of technology and other things that we are trying to bring to the podcast, into our streaming, so that we can just make some better content for you guys.
We're trying so hard.
One of the things that helps us out is you guys joining us on Patreon and you guys joining us on stream and showing your support. If you are interested in supporting us in that way, you can head on over to patreon.com/underthehiveofmadness and check out some of our different tier levels and some of our different perks. We're looking at introducing some new perks into what we're already doing. We also have our ongoing Innsmouth Hive project. We're starting to look at putting some of that down into PDF form. So we'll be dripping that out as we get to it. Something else that we offer to all of our patrons currently is if you've got a private project that you're working on and you want us to shout it out, we'll shout it out in a couple of episodes. Right now, Ickbard is doing some commissioned painting.
Yep.
Or he just opened for some commissioned painting, so we've shouted him out a couple of times.
Voice acting.
He does?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's pretty damn dope.
Yeah, he does his voice mod, Space Marine, and among a few other things.
That's pretty cool. So yeah, if you've got some artwork that you want us to share, you want to open up commissions,
you guys want me to name your stupid orcs? I will.
Yeah. And you get that at $3, $6, or $9.
Yeah.
We are working on some other benefits, and we're trying to just kind of reward you guys as we move forward, but it really does help us. We're able to pay for some of the audio equipment. We're able to pay for sound dampening equipment so we can turn our studio space into a bit more of a functional space.
Yeah, the real thing to look at this is, we're not in this to make money for ourselves. We're in this to just create good content for you guys.
Yeah.
So about building a community, about giving you something to do on Friday nights, hanging out with us on Wednesday nights, hanging out with us during the week. I mean, like I said, on Discord, we're there all the time. We're not in this for you just to watch, you know, like we're in this because we want to develop a community where we're interactive and we're all working together to have a good time. You know, just generally have hobbies, man.
Yeah.
You know, getting out there. One thing that I've definitely learned from COVID and being stuck indoors all day is like, God, it sucks when you don't have anything to do. Like, cheers, man. You like, everybody knows your name, you know, and it's just a good, solid community. And we can do that. We have the cameras. We can stand up here and we can engage with you and we can formulate that group. That's what we're here for. So the more you donate, the more you participate, the bigger and better, and the more that we're going to be able to have that reach and grow.
And we'll try to share some actual roadmap stuff out too, so you guys kind of get an idea of what equipment we are looking at buying and what pair of boots we're going to get for Tom. So he can stomp Kevin. I mean, so he can lovingly tap Kevin with his toes. If you want to find us around the web, check out our link tree, which is linktree/under the hive. That's it for us here at 665.66 UHM Chemrat Radio. Once again, coming to you from the neutral territory of the Hangnail. Hangnail, best goddamn brew I've ever had. What do we call this corpse beer?
The Nutty J.
The Nutty J.
I'm temporarily blinded because of it.
There's a lot of you motherfuckers here. I mean, there's a lot of those motherfuckers here. What'd I say the first time?
Make sure you join the Nutty J's in the Discord, all you Patreon and Twitch subscribers.
Don't listen to him, man.
Yeah.
Warmongers.
Do not recruit on the podcast. On the pirate broadcast.
What?
Fuck you.
You cannot recruit on the pirate podcast.
Splatterhawks, we're not supposed to know.
We don't. I was just saying.
Why are you recruiting?
J's out there. I'm not.
Are we four-armed rats?
Terrible.
What are you doing?
Yeah.
Really terrible at this. We're literally the worst.
Nutty J's, baby.
Until we all meet again, make sure to watch out for those four-armed emperors. I've heard if you don't give them the deepest of genuflections, they may just push you into a sumpgator's mouth themselves.
They're going to give you their deepest. What was that word?
Genuflection. It's when you bow.
Genuflections. They're going to give you their deepest genuflections.
They're going to give you whatever the hell Ryan just said. Whatever the hell that word was, I don't know. But that's it.
That's it.
That's it
In your mouth.
from us here at Chemrat Radio. Signing off.